2 days before his death, he said this.
Every day that I have on earth is a gift and a blessing, and I'm very grateful for that because, frankly, people are disappearing. Scientists are going missing. Now they're saying they're going to investigate this. The president himself is saying they're going to look into this and see if anything's going on. It's a little bit scary.
That was David Wilcock, a paranormal author and Ancient Aliens contributor, known for claims about UFOs, hidden technology, and government cover-ups. In the video, he referenced a series of recent deaths and disappearances tied to researchers and scientists in space, energy, and defense fields that he and many others believed were connected. Just 2 days later, on April 20th, 2026, in Colorado, deputies responded to a crisis call. Authorities said Wilcock was found outside with a weapon and died shortly after police arrived. His death was officially ruled a suicide. In 2019, aboard the Disney Dream in the Atlantic Ocean, a 5-year-old girl climbed onto a porthole railing for a photo and fell nearly 50 feet into the ocean below. Her father jumped in after her seconds later, hitting the water hard before swimming to her and keeping her above the surface as the ship drifted on. With no flotation device and surrounded by open sea, they remained in the water until crew launched a rescue boat to pull them out. Both miraculously survived as the girl was treated for hypothermia, while her father suffered serious injuries including a fractured spine from the impact with the water. While serving a life sentence for murder, Rocky Beeman brutally murdered a fellow inmate who was serving a life sentence for essaying a 10-year-old girl. But despite this, Beeman was later given a child rapist as his cellmate who he proceeded to brutally murder as well. He said he resented sex offenders and that killing them gave him, quote, the best feeling I've had in a long time. He also said the only way to stop him from killing them was to execute him. Beeman was eventually sentenced to death, but took his own life while on death row in 2020. Grady Stiles Jr. was born in 1937 with a rare genetic condition known as ectrodactyly, which gave him claw-like hands and feet. He became a circus performer under the name Lobster Boy, but was known to be a viciously abusive alcoholic in person. In 1978, he was convicted of murdering his daughter's fiancé on the day before their wedding. He openly confessed to the murder but wasn't sent to prison since no state institution had the resources for an inmate with his condition. Stiles continued to perform until 1992 when he was murdered by a hitman hired by his wife and son. In 2006, the burned remains of an unidentified young woman were found along a Texas roadside, leaving her known only as Lavender Doe for years because of the purple clothing she was wearing. The case sat cold for years until an amateur sleuth began comparing online Jane Doe files and helped spark renewed attention that led to advanced DNA testing. In 2019, she was finally identified as Dana Lynn Todd, restoring her name after 13 years. In 2023, Joseph Burnett pleaded guilty to her murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 14-year-old Mexican girl Paloma Nicole Arellano died after undergoing cosmetic surgery that reportedly included breast augmentation and a Brazilian butt lift at a private clinic allegedly run by her mother's boyfriend. Authorities said she suffered severe complications following the procedure and was placed in a medically induced coma but died a few days later. Prosecutors later confirmed that the man accused of performing the procedure was arrested and charged in connection with her death, including allegations tied to practicing medicine without proper authorization. This 15th century Italian painting is the earliest known depiction of the guinea worm, an awful parasite that has haunted humans for thousands of years. It enters the system through dirty water containing its larva and grows into a 3-foot-long worm that eventually erupts from the skin, causing an incredibly painful burning sensation. To relieve this, people often splash water onto the affected area, prompting the worm to discharge more larvae into the person's body and start the horrible cycle all over again. There were more than 3.5 million guinea worm cases in 1986, but that number has been significantly reduced in recent years. Armed only with a knife, Master Sergeant Roy Benavides went to assist a 12-man Special Forces team who were surrounded by 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers during the Vietnam War. Following the grueling 6-hour battle, Benavides had 37 puncture wounds, exposed intestines, and a broken jaw. He was pronounced dead until he managed to spit blood in the face of the man who was zipping up his body bag. Benavides eventually made a full recovery and was awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions. In April of 2026, in the village of Hagenbach in eastern France, police responded to a neighbor's report of sounds of a child coming from a parked utility van. When they opened it, they found a 9-year-old boy alive but in shocking condition, completely unclothed, lying in fetal position on a mound of trash and waste, severely malnourished with very pale skin, and muscles so atrophied from prolonged confinement that he could no longer walk or stand. The boy had been locked inside the van since November of 2024, over 16 months. To neighbors and others, he had simply disappeared, with the family claiming he no longer lived there. His 43-year-old father admitted to keeping the child confined, saying it was to protect him from his partner, who allegedly wanted to place the boy in psychiatric care. The father was charged with kidnapping and deprivation of care, while his 37-year-old partner was also charged for failing to intervene. The boy was hospitalized and his siblings were removed from the home as the investigation continues. Mexican painter Frida Kahlo's life was a haunting mix of brilliance and suffering. After contracting polio at age 6, classmates called her Frida the Cripple. At 18, she was nearly killed when a steel handrail impaled her during a bus crash, entering through her pelvis and exiting her abdomen. Her spine, pelvis, collarbone, and foot were completely shattered. She endured over 30 brutal surgeries, spent months in body casts, and painted while bedridden. Frida later suffered 5 to 7 miscarriages as a result, with one nearly killing her from blood loss, and she captured the horror in disturbing works like Henry Ford Hospital, showing herself naked, bleeding, and surrounded by a floating fetus and surgical tools. Later on, gangrene took her leg, only deepening her depression. She filled her diary with dark images and wrote, "I am not sick, I am broken." Though officially ruled a pulmonary embolism, many believe she intentionally overdosed at 47. Her final diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope to never return." This is a snapping turtle buried in mud just after emerging from hibernation. This is where the Native American legend of the earth being brought into existence and carried on the shell of a turtle originated from. Alligators have been a long-running problem for NASA, as there have been multiple incidents of alligators climbing over NASA's fences and entering buildings overnight. Dolphins can identify humans by checking our skeletal structure through their sonar. They have been known to help shipwreck victims fight off sharks and stay afloat, because as mammals, they understand the concept of drowning. In 2012, tragedy struck when 30-year-old newlywed Maria Pantazopoulos was having some trash-the-dress photos taken in Montreal while wearing her wedding dress. She was only standing in about a foot of water on a river when her gown became waterlogged, quickly pulling her deeper and deeper underwater as her dress suddenly weighed up to 100 pounds. The photographer did everything he could to save her before Maria cried out, "I can't anymore, it's too heavy," and then she let go. Her body was recovered by a scuba diver 2 hours later. In 2008, a college student from Belgium decided to heat up some leftover spaghetti that had been sitting out on the kitchen counter for 5 days. He told his parents that it tasted strange, but figured it was the new tomato sauce that he added to the pasta. After eating the entire bowl, he headed out to play some soccer but had to return home 30 minutes later while suffering from severe abdominal pains, headaches, and nausea. He then vomited for several hours before finally managing to fall asleep, but he never woke up. The man's lifeless body was discovered the next morning after he died from an extreme form of food poisoning known as Bacillus cereus, aka fried rice syndrome. This was the tragic moment when just a single pitch pushed an MLB player to suicide. On October 12, 1986, Angels relief pitcher Donnie Moore was just one strike away from sending his team to the World Series when he gave up a devastating home run to Boston's Dave Henderson in Game 5 of the ALCS. The Angels went on to lose the game, the series, and fans never forgave him. Even though the loss wasn't entirely his fault, Moore became the public scapegoat. He was relentlessly booed, received hate mail and death threats, and was blamed for cursing the team. The moment single-handedly destroyed his career and mental health. He spiraled into depression, injuries, alcoholism, and financial stress. For years, he lived with the unbearable guilt of that one pitch, famously saying, "I relive it every day." In July of 1989, consumed with anger and despair, he shot his wife during an argument, then turned the gun on himself in front of one of their children. His wife survived, but Moore died at just 35 years old. One of the most tragic examples of how a single moment in sports can lead to a real-life nightmare. Here are some morbid facts about Albert Einstein. Around 1902, Einstein had an illegitimate child named Lee Searle with his future wife Mileva. Very little is known about the girl other than that she was mentally disabled and died from infection at a very young age. In all likelihood, Albert never met the girl in person. Her existence was only discovered in 1987 through a collection of letters. Soon afterwards, the relationship was falling apart, so Einstein made Mileva sign a contract to help work things out. It had multiple conditions, such as that my clothes and laundry are kept in good order, that I will receive my 3 meals regularly in my room, and that my bedroom and study are kept neat at all times. After those two eventually got divorced, Einstein married the daughter of his mother's sister, making them first cousins. Despite being very smart, Albert's second son Edward was diagnosed with schizophrenia and described by his father as an insoluble problem. He was sent to a mental asylum at the age of 20 and remained there for the next 35 years before dying of a stroke in 1965. A woman from Turkey recently underwent surgery to have 35 olive pits, 28 date seeds, and 5 stones removed from her digestive tract. She was experiencing severe abdominal pain, leading to the discovery that she'd been swallowing various pits and seeds for decades. After narrowly avoiding death due to the complications, she's now vocal about urging people to never swallow large seeds. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, General Eisenhower was under so much stress that he'd been smoking 6 packs of cigarettes, drinking 24 cups of coffee, and averaging just 2 hours of sleep every day. In the 1950s, 3 campers were found dead at their campsite in Oregon without any sign of struggle. Investigators were stumped until they soon found a dead newt in the hunter's coffee pot. They likely died after drinking the coffee, since newts can produce a toxin that's 10,000 times more potent than cyanide. Ancient Greek lawmaker Charondas issued a law stating that anyone who brought weapons into the Athenian assembly would be executed. One day after hunting in the countryside, he entered the assembly without knowing that his hunting knife was still attached to his belt. He then promptly took his own life to uphold his own law. In 2001, Ashton Kutcher had a girlfriend who was murdered by a serial killer after being stabbed 35 times in her own home. Kutcher would end up testifying in the trial of the Hollywood Ripper, who would later confess to murdering at least 10 women over a 15-year span. Author of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, lost her virginity on top of her mother's grave. She also kept her dead husband's heart and carried it around for 30 years until her own death. According to the FBI, if you're murdered in the United States, there's only about a 40% chance that your killer will be found and punished. In 2009, a Russian man went to the doctor suspecting that there was something wrong with his lungs. Initially, doctors thought they were dealing with a tumor, but it ended up being something they'd never seen before. Turned out that years ago, the man accidentally inhaled the seed of a fir tree and it started growing inside of him. This is a photo of a captive orca whale named Tilikum staring down its trainers at SeaWorld. There have only been 4 human deaths caused by orcas to date, and Tilikum was responsible for 3 of them. In one instance in 2010, 40-year-old Don Brancho leaned over his tank during something known as a relationship session. That's when the 11-ton orca took her in his mouth, dragged her into the water, and violently killed her in front of hundreds of terrified tourists. Even when SeaWorld staff members had trapped and netted him, Tilikum refused to let go of the body. It's believed his hostility was caused by a total accident that happened just minutes prior to the attack. Tilikum performed a trick that Dawn didn't see, so she didn't reward him with fish as she normally would. This, coupled with the psychological damage of living in captivity, resulted in the orca's unnatural aggression. This is the facial reconstruction created from a severed human head found in an Illinois park in 1993, the only clue investigators had for nearly 3 decades. The victim remained unidentified until 2022, when DNA genealogy revealed she was Susan Lund, who disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1992 after walking to a nearby store. Despite finally learning her name almost 30 years later, the rest of her body was never recovered. No suspect was ever charged, and her murder remains unsolved. This is a decorative tower filled with thousands of shaved human jawbone fragments, removed from patients during cosmetic jaw reduction surgeries in South Korea. The display came from a Seoul plastic surgery clinic, where the surgeon stacked discarded pieces of patients' faces into stacked columns to represent how many operations he had performed. The towers sparked public backlash and were later removed after authorities fined the clinic for violating medical waste laws requiring human remains to be incinerated. The case became a disturbing symbol of how normalized most extreme facial alteration has become in South Korea, to the point that many patients have even reported being questioned at border control because their faces no longer match their passport photos. This has to be the strangest disorder I've ever heard of by far. Body integrity identity disorder is a rare neurological condition that causes the patient to believe that one or more of their limbs does not belong to them. This sense of disconnection often begins in early childhood, with sufferers reporting an intense and persistent desire to remove or disable the offending limb. Some patients become so distressed that they attempt self-amputation, using power tools, shotguns, or dry ice to damage the limb beyond repair. Renowned cricket historian Roland Bowen famously severed his own leg in 1968 while suffering from this disorder, and in the late 90s, Scottish surgeon Robert Smith controversially performed amputations on healthy patients who begged him to cut off one of their limbs. In many of these cases, patients report an indescribable sense of relief and psychological alignment following the removal of the unwanted limb. For them, the amputation is not a loss, but a long-sought correction in the harmony between their physical form and internal identity. This 1998 photo was taken in Omagh, Ireland, just minutes before a bomb placed in the red car exploded. 29 people were killed by the blast and another 220 were injured. The cameraman of the photo died, but the man shown with his daughter happened to survive. A healthy human heart can only beat for about 1 minute when removed from the body, but the heart of a coke user can beat for up to 25 minutes outside of the body. In 2011, a 17-year-old boy jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge to impress his friends. The jump has a 98% death rate, but the boy survived with only minor bruising. In 1980, 7-year-old Anna Bachmeyer was sexually assaulted before being strangled to death by her 35-year-old neighbor. During the trial, Anna's mother opened fire in a crowded courtroom and murdered the man. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison but was released after 3. Horseshoe crabs have been around for 450 million years and have blue blood. Instead of hemoglobin, their blood contains hemocyanin, which gets its blue color from oxygenated copper. Their blood is so valuable to the medical industry that a gallon costs around $60,000. The sting of the tarantula hawk wasp is so unbearable that victims are often advised to lie down and start screaming to avoid further injury. In 2018, Russian scientists collected and analyzed 300 prehistoric worms from Arctic permafrost. After being thawed, 2 of the worms began to move and eat. Both of the worms are estimated to be well over 30,000 years old. This Pleistocene wolf is so well preserved that it looks like it could still be snarling today. It was found in Siberian permafrost, in the spot that it likely died some 40,000 years ago. This 2,000-year-old Roman bathhouse found in Algeria is still in use today. This is a sample of amber containing the bone, tissue, and feathers of a coelurosaur from the Cretaceous period. Researchers believe that this has the potential to be the most conclusive evidence so far that dinosaurs were feathered. In 2021, Lady Gaga's dog walker Ryan Fisher was walking 3 of her French bulldogs in Hollywood when he was suddenly attacked by 2 men. After being shot in the chest, which resulted in permanent damage including the partial loss of a lung, he still tried to protect the dogs, but 2 of them were taken. Gaga later offered a $500K reward for the return of her pets, and 2 days later, a woman brought the dogs to an LA police station. The woman was later arrested along with 4 others in connection with the crime and tried to sue Gaga for not paying the reward money, asking for the $500K plus another $15 million for financial damages, pain and suffering, mental anguish, loss of enjoyment of life, and legal fees. She claimed that she never would have returned the dogs if not for the promised reward, and was therefore defrauded because she ended up with no dogs and no reward. The woman ended up losing the case, while shooter James Jackson pleaded no contest to attempted murder and was sentenced to 21 years in prison. One of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer's victims nearly escaped his gruesome fate. In 1991, a 14-year-old boy named Konarak ran naked into the street, heavily drugged and covered in blood. In his brain-injured state, Konarak struggled to explain his situation when authorities arrived. Dahmer eventually found the boy with the police and convinced them that the boy was his 19-year-old lover. Despite bystanders pleading for his life, the officers returned the boy to Dahmer's apartment. They noticed a strange smell in the apartment, which was the decaying corpse of a previous victim in the bedroom, but made no attempts to investigate. Later that evening, Dahmer sexually abused, killed, and dismembered the boy. In 2007, the Coble family lost their 2 girls and 1 boy in a horrific car accident. A year later, the mother gave birth to triplets, 2 girls and 1 boy. The reason The Beauty and the Beast was written was to help young girls accept arranged marriages. This woman single-handedly buried and gave funerals to more than 40 gay men at the height of the AIDS epidemic. Many victims were never claimed by their families due to stigmas surrounding the disease. On Christmas Eve in 2008, 45-year-old Bruce Jeffrey Pardo arrived at his ex-wife's house in California wearing a Santa Claus suit and carrying multiple firearms. When the front door was opened by an 8-year-old girl, he shot her in the face before opening fire at a crowded family Christmas party. Bruce then unleashed a homemade fuel dispensing device hidden inside a wrapped present, igniting a massive fire that trapped victims inside as the house burned. 9 people were killed, some by gunfire, and others burned so badly that it took investigators several days to identify them. The fire burned so intensely that parts of Bruce's Santa suit melted onto his skin, forcing him to flee while still on fire. He later drove to his brother's house, where he turned the gun on himself. Investigators later determined the attack was driven by rage over a recent divorce, mounting financial pressure after losing his job, and a bitter custody dispute, with Bruce specifically targeting his ex-wife and her family. Police discovered that he'd spent months preparing, stockpiling weapons, booby-trapping vehicles with explosives, and compiling a list of additional targets, including his ex-wife's divorce attorney, making the attack one of the most disturbing holiday massacres in U.S. history. While on his way to Toronto to film the 2nd season of Gen V in March of 2024, actor Chance Perdomo tragically died in a single-vehicle motorcycle crash at just 27 years old. Authorities confirmed no other vehicles were involved, but never released the exact location, cause of the crash, weather condition, or road details, leaving the true circumstances unknown. Because he died alone, there were no public witnesses and no full incident report, sparking endless speculation among fans. Eerily, just days before the accident, he posted a photo of his motorcycle on Instagram with the ominous caption, "The final calm before the storm." His death impacted Gen V so heavily that production was postponed, and instead of recasting his character, the writers rewrote the entire season around his absence, a rare move that shows just how important and irreplaceable he was as an actor. In 1996, a stray mother cat in New York City became famous for performing one of the most heroic acts in animal rescue history. When the abandoned garage she and her newborn kittens were living in caught fire, she ran through the flames 5 separate times, carrying each kitten out one by one. By the time she saved the last one, her eyes were blistered shut, her ears and paws were burned, and her fur was scorched. But she touched each kitten with her nose to make sure they were all alive before collapsing unconscious. Nicknamed Scarlet, she later recovered at a veterinary hospital and was reunited with her kittens, all of whom survived. The story went viral worldwide, and the mother cat and all 5 of her babies were eventually adopted into loving homes. These extraterrestrial rocks were discovered in the sand of the Sahara. Libyan desert glass is one of the rarest minerals on Earth, and it's of unknown origin. Since only a celestial impact or a nuclear explosion would have resulted in such a geological anomaly. Pieces of the extremely rare mineral were even found in the tomb of King Tut. This is what Saturn would look like if it were as close to Earth as the Moon. It's been estimated that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on Earth. But there are more atoms in 1 grain of sand than there are stars in the universe. When Southern California was hit with a massive power outage in 1994, a bunch of LA residents began to call 911 about strange clouds hovering overhead. In reality, they were just seeing the Milky Way for the first time. In 2002, 2 airplanes collided over Germany, killing all 71 total passengers on board. 2 years later, the air traffic controller who was responsible was stabbed to death by a Russian man named Vitaly Kaloyev, whose wife and 2 kids were victims of the crash. Kaloyev was only sentenced to 2 years in prison and was hailed as a hero back in Russia. In 2019, a British teenager went blind after maintaining a horrendous diet for several years. It consisted of French fries, white bread, Pringles, and the occasional slice of ham. In 2013, Disney abandoned their policy of letting disabled people skip lines at their theme parks. This was because too many people were hiring disabled tour guides to help them skip the lines. Judith Barcy, the girl who voiced Ducky in The Land Before Time, was shot and killed by her own father in a murder-suicide in 1988. She was only 10 years old. This is what the end of a species looks like. A keeper in Sudan says goodbye to the last male white rhino in the world, 2018. This is the last photo ever taken of American freediver Nicholas Mavoli. He was attempting to freedive 236 feet deep. He completed the dive, surfaced, gave the OK sign, tried to speak, and then he passed out. He never regained consciousness and died later that day to pulmonary edema. This is a photo of Emmett Till's killers smiling after being acquitted of the brutal murder in 1955. Protected against double jeopardy, the next year the two men publicly admitted that they did indeed kill the 14-year-old boy. Princess Qajar of Persia was a national symbol of beauty in the early 1900s. It is said that more than 10 young men committed suicide because she rejected them. A researcher once played an audio recording of an elephant that had died to its herd. They went wild looking for him, and the elephant's daughter called for days afterward. Rock legend Dave Grohl has tried to live as frugally as possible after watching his mother suffer a stroke while filing her taxes. Famous philosopher Kurt Gödel had an obsessive fear of being poisoned, so he only ate food cooked by his wife. When his wife went to the hospital for an extended stay, Gödel stopped eating completely and promptly starved to death. If you're ever dared to swim in a tank that looks like this, say no. Aeration tanks have a much lower density than water and therefore very little buoyancy. This means if you fall into one, you will certainly drown. Ashley Martinson was abused by several of her mother's boyfriends throughout her childhood. The day after her 17th birthday, she killed her stepfather with a shotgun before stabbing her mother 30 times to death. She was sentenced to 23 years in prison, but says she feels safer and happier now than she ever did at home. In the early 2000s, CEO Stuart Parnell created a salmonella outbreak by purposely tainting his peanut products to save some cash. As a result of his greediness, 9 people died and hundreds of others got sick. This photo shows Parnell refusing to talk when a member of Congress challenges him to eat his own products in front of a committee. The Altamira man is an extremely well-preserved fossil of a Neanderthal who fell down a sinkhole over 100,000 years ago. Discovered in 1993, experts are still working on a way to extract the skeleton from the calcite without damaging it. Stephen King would do so much cocaine while writing that he had to stuff cotton up his nose to prevent blood from dripping onto his typewriter. There are various books that he doesn't even remember writing, including the 1981 classic Cujo. In 2011, 2 miners in Alberta, Canada accidentally stumbled upon a 110-million-year-old mummified dinosaur. The fossilized specimen, which was identified as a type of nodosaur, is so well preserved that its skin and scales are still completely intact. In its heyday, it would have looked something like this guy. Scientists say that it's likely the closest thing to a real-life dinosaur that humans have ever seen. In 1963, a Turkish man found a strange cave after he knocked down a wall in his home. Further digging revealed access to a complex tunnel system with more cave-like rooms. He had discovered the ancient underground city of Derinkuyu, built during the Byzantine period. Experts say the ancient city could have housed more than 20,000 people during its peak over 1,000 years ago. These are photos of former Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko before and after he was poisoned by Vladimir Putin in 2004. He and his family believe the assassination attempt was ordered because Yushchenko wanted Ukraine to integrate more with the rest of Europe. A doctor chronicled the progression of Alzheimer's disease in one of his patients by collecting her signatures on medical forms over the years. Ever since the Taliban takeover, the price for a kidney on the Afghan black market has dropped from $4,000 to $1,500. This is because so many people have been selling their own kidneys just so they can afford to feed their children. Such high supply of the organ has caused the price to plummet in short time. In 1966, a teenage boy was flying a kite in Brazil when he stumbled upon 2 dead bodies lying in the grass. Later identified as electronics technicians, the men were wearing matching formal suits, raincoats, and most bizarrely, homemade lead masks covering their eyes. One of them had a note in his pocket that read, Be at the agreed place at 4:30. Take capsules after the effect. Protect metals. Await signal. There were no signs of violence, and no clear cause of death was ever determined. The capsules were never found, and toxicology reports proved inconclusive due to organ decomposition. The men had been seen acting nervous and paranoid in the days leading up to their deaths, while reportedly measuring distances in the hills and carrying around a notebook filled with strange codes and symbols. Their families later stated that the men had been obsessively studying obscure books on alchemy, spiritualism, and intense luminosity experiments. Their bizarre deaths remain a total mystery to this day. Kyle Marissa Roth blew up on TikTok for fearlessly exposing celebrity scandals using follower-submitted blind items. Despite her bold personality online, she was quietly battling serious health issues behind the scenes, reportedly suffering from chronic pain and illness that she never fully shared with her audience. But instead of letting it break her, she used it as fuel. Roth said that seeing other chronically ill people push through their struggles inspired her to keep making content. However, in April of 2024, she was suddenly found dead at just 36 years old, leaving millions of followers stunned and searching for answers. Even stranger, just days before she died, Roth had posted videos saying she was going through something but would explain soon. Her cause of death still hasn't publicly been released, but her family has asked for privacy and insisted that she was deeply loved. The woman who spent her life revealing secrets left the world with one of her own, but fans remember her not just for the drama she uncovered, but also for her humor, bravery, and the way she made people feel seen and entertained during their darkest days. During a trip to Africa in 1896, American taxidermist Carl Akeley survived a leopard attack by ramming his hand down the cat's throat and choking it to death. Today, Carl is known as the father of modern taxidermy for his innovative techniques, and is also remembered for inventing the nature dioramas that are popular at museums. A Russian kitchen worker named Zinaida Portnova is known for killing more than 100 Nazis by poisoning their food when she was only 16. While being interrogated by the Gestapo, she disarmed the Nazi detective and shot him in the head. She then murdered 2 more Nazis with the same gun before being killed while attempting to escape. Nicknamed Black Death, Henry Johnson was a member of the Harlem Hellfighters who single-handedly stopped a German ambush in World War I. Despite being stabbed, shot, and hit with a grenade, the 5'4" soldier injured or killed 24 German enemies without a working gun. He was the first American soldier to win a Croix de Guerre, France's highest honor for bravery. A boy born with just 2% of his brain completely defied doctors' predictions after his brain grew back to 80% of the average size. Doctors had told the parents to terminate the pregnancy not once, but 5 times. The 8-year-old from England is the only known child to ever survive this condition. In order to keep Genghis Khan's burial a secret, all 2,000 plus people who attended his funeral were executed. The executioners were then killed by members of his escort, who eventually committed suicide when they reached their destination. 800 years later, the site still remains undiscovered to this day. In 1944, 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. was the youngest person ever to be executed in the United States. He was given the electric chair after being accused of murdering 2 young girls in South Carolina. He was exonerated 70 years after his execution in 2014 when a court ruled that he had not received a fair trial. David Reimer was a Canadian man who was raised as a girl after a botched circumcision led to a sex reassignment surgery before he was 2. Upon realizing he was not a girl, Reimer started living as a male at age 15. But after years of suffering from severe depression, he committed suicide at age 38. In 1997, the Cat in the Hat Thanksgiving Day Parade float careened out of control due to high winds, knocking a lamppost into the head of Kathleen Carana, putting her in a month-long coma. She sued Macy's in the city for $395 million and ended up settling for an undisclosed amount in 2001. Kathleen eventually purchased a nice New York City apartment with the settlement money, but just 5 years later, Yankees pitcher Corey Lidle crashed his plane into her building and the engine ended up in her bedroom. Luckily, the crash happened just minutes before Kathleen was due to arrive home. But Lidle and his flight instructor were both killed, while 21 others in the building were injured. Adding to the weirdness of this story, the flight instructor's friend was also supposed to be on this flight but got stuck in traffic and told them to leave without him. So he managed to escape death until just 1 month later when he was killed in a separate plane crash. Playboy model Anna Nicole Smith didn't receive a single penny when her 90-year-old billionaire husband died. Oil tycoon J. Howard Marshall never included her in his will and left his $1.6 billion estate to his son. If you receive the wrong blood type for a transfusion, one of the symptoms is a sense of impending doom. The Roman Emperor Nero accidentally killed his pregnant wife by kicking her to death. He then found a young boy who looked exactly like her, castrated him, and married him. In 1771, a Scottish woman was sentenced to death by hanging for the crime of hiding a pregnancy. Maggie Dixon was hung, declared dead, and carted off in a wooden coffin. She then suddenly woke up on the way to the graveyard and was later released since her sentence had been carried out. She lived for another 40 years, known as Half Hang It Maggie. Don't watch this one unless you're ready to cry. In 1939, a mentally disabled 23-year-old man named Joe Arity was falsely accused of the rape and murder of a teenage girl. He was sentenced to death in Colorado, and the moments leading to his execution are nothing short of heartbreaking. Joe was known for playing with a toy train given to him by the warden, who called Joe the happiest prisoner on death row. It was clear, however, that Joe didn't understand the situation or his impending execution. For his last meal, he requested ice cream and even saved some for after the execution. He was reported to have smiled while being brought to the gas chamber and was only momentarily nervous until the warden grabbed his hand and reassured him. Arity was officially pardoned 72 years after his death, after evidence had proven that he was coerced into confession. In Osaka, Japan, 23-year-old cosplayer Saki Sato was arrested after police say she cut off part of her 21-year-old boyfriend's ring finger with a hatchet and stored it inside the refrigerator. Authorities allege she had previously cut off his left nipple with scissors and exerted extreme control over his finances and phone. The victim himself eventually contacted police, leading officers to discover the preserved finger. Sato denied intentionally mutilating him, claiming he hurt himself, but prosecutors charged her with multiple counts of assault. If convicted, she faces significant prison time under Japan's criminal injury statutes. In August of 2010, dismissed Filipino officer Rolando Mendoza hijacked a tour bus carrying Hong Kong visitors in Manila, demanding his job be reinstated after corruption charges. The standoff dragged on for nearly 11 hours and was broadcast live, with negotiations collapsing after Mendoza's brother, who was trying to mediate, was arrested by authorities. As tensions escalated, Mendoza opened fire on the hostages, while police launched a chaotic rescue attempt that drew heavy criticism for poor coordination. The crisis ended when a police sniper finally killed Mendoza, but 8 tourists were dead and several others injured, sparking diplomatic fallout between Hong Kong and the Philippines. At SummerSlam 1997, Stone Cold Steve Austin suffered a serious neck injury after back-to-back incidents helped solidify the piledriver's reputation as one of wrestling's most dangerous moves and led to stricter safety protocols in the WWE. South Korean actor Jo Son is known for playing Random Task in the first Austin Powers movie. But in 2008, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for torturing and essaying a female victim on Christmas Day. 3 years later, 27 years were added onto his sentence after he murdered his cellmate. In 2019, Florida man Grant Amato murdered his mother, father, and brother and tried to stage it as a murder-suicide committed by his brother. But police didn't buy his story when they found out his parents were threatening to kick him out of their house over his severe porn addiction. He had stolen over $200,000 from them and spent it all on a cam model from Bulgaria. In 1916, a Tennessee circus elephant named Mary murdered her handler by crushing his head on his second day of the job. The circus owner then decided to publicly execute the 6,000-pound elephant by hanging her from a crane. After she was killed in front of a crowd of 2,500 men, women, and children, an autopsy revealed that she had a severely infected tooth that was likely the cause of her murderous rage. Brendan Fraser's brief collapse was driven by years of physical destruction, psychological breakdown, and what many believe was a Hollywood blacklist. At the height of his career, he was performing nearly all of his own stunts, which led to multiple herniated discs, spinal compression, a fractured pelvis, and repeated surgeries that left him in constant pain. In 1999, 1999, Fraser nearly died during the filming of The Mummy when a hanging stunt went horribly wrong and the rope was pulled too tightly, cutting off blood flow to his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. He later said doctors told him he came dangerously close to serious brain injury or death. Around the same time, he endured the passing of his mother, a financially devastating divorce, and severe depression. Brendan later alleged he was sexually assaulted by a powerful Hollywood executive in 2003, and after speaking about it privately, his career abruptly stalled. Many believe he was quietly blacklisted as major roles vanished almost overnight, leaving him to describe himself as invisible for years while living in pain and isolation. After roughly a 15-year hiatus, Fraser ultimately rebuilt his life and career, returning to Hollywood on his own terms and finding renewed stability and appreciation from fans. In 1961, 5-year-old Nancy Brewster got a lump on her neck and was eventually too sick to go to school. So her deeply religious family brought her to a Christian practitioner who simply prayed for her and said that her illness was an illusion. When she died horribly 2 years later, there was no funeral and the family never spoke of her again. If you ever have to sneeze, just let it rip. In 2018, a British man blew a hole in his throat by holding his nose and mouth shut while sneezing. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks and lucky to be alive. Alexander Litvinenko was a former Russian spy who heavily criticized Vladimir Putin. In 2006, he was quickly rushed to the hospital after being poisoned with a cup of tea in a London hotel. Working with Scottish detectives as he lay dying, he was able to trace the lethal substance to one of his former comrades in the Russian Secret Service, thus solving his own murder case. This elderly woman from Brooklyn is a hoarder who also happens to be legally blind. At some point in the 1990s, her son who lived in the house disappeared. In 2016, his fully clothed skeleton was found in a room filled with garbage. She had been living with his corpse for 20 years. These are just some of the reasons why people used to be committed to mental asylums. In 2006, 5-year-old Robert Turner called 911 after his mother collapsed in her bedroom. But the operator hung up after asking him to put an adult on the phone and assuming it was a prank. 3 hours later, he called 911 again and another operator told him to stop prank calling. This time, police were sent to the home where they found that the mother of 10 had died from a heart attack.